Hello, everyone. Welcome to this event with the Sana'a Center. Today, I am with you from Mocha on the west coast of Yemen. I arrived last night. It was a pretty decently long trip from Aden to Mocha and now to the headquarters of Brigadier General Tareq Saleh, the head of the Joint Operations Command and the National Resistance, the largest military force on the west coast of Yemen, which overlooks one of the most important straits in the world and has been fighting against the Houthis, one of the most important battles against the Houthis since they left Sana'a in December of 2017. Recently, Tariq announced their political office, and today in this meeting we will get to know him better to understand what is happening in Makkah, what this political office is, and what exactly they're expecting to do, and what is the current situation with the battles on the west coast of Yemen. In addition to the fact that we will have discussions later into some other issues. I would like to remind you that this meeting is one of a series of meetings. We started with His Excellency the Prime Minister, Ma'in Abdul Mulk, and later on with the Governor of Marib, Sultan Arada, and today we are with the Commander Tareq Saleh from Mocha. Thank you very much for being here with us, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. Let's start with the first question that I think is on everyone's mind with regards to the political office. What exactly is the political office of the National Resistance? Can it be seen as an alternative to the General People's Congress, which is the party that seems to have fragmented and no longer has the political influence that it did? So what exactly is the political office of the National Resistance? Welcome, Majid, and I would like to welcome all of the participants here with us today. The political office was created as a result of the ongoing political situation in Yemen and the developments that have occurred. We on the West Coast need a political entity to represent us in any upcoming negotiations, to be another voice that represents the Yemeni people outside of any religious political parties. The General People's Congress is the umbrella that we are all under, but unfortunately it was fragmented between those inside Yemen and those outside. And this major political party was not given the opportunity to play its role in the Yemeni political arena, whether in foreign representation or internally. You know, inside Yemen that it is under pressure by the Houthis, and the GPC in Sana'a has become very marginalized in its political role. And outside of the country, it is divided into a number of different factions. We hope the GPC can play this very important role, and we're obviously never going to be an alternative to the GPC in the role that it played. But the political office of the National Resistance represents the joint forces, the forces here on the West Coast. And it also represents the political arm of all of these forces here. In Yemen, anyone in the Yemeni political arena, we welcome anyone who wants to join this new political office of the joint forces. For us to have a progress in the political track within Yemeni society, I think that Yemeni society needs to start using different tools and more active and influential tools in trying to deal with the Yemeni rebellion and the Yemeni movement, the Houthi rebellion, the Houthi movement, which unfortunately the older tools that were used or the political disputes that were there before the Houthis went into Sana'a, they have not been able to confront the Houthis, despite the large-scale support by the coalition and it's 6 years of war. I think that they have failed in managing this conflict, and there needs to be new blood included and new components that will try to develop political activity and to ensure that there is progress made in this track.
ماجد تأسست
The National Resistance Forces were established in 2017, and it was requested to go into battle with the Houthis, and it did that. It got to the border of Hodeidah city, and it seemed to be the most ambitious forces against the Houthis, and they achieved results very quickly. But then the Stockholm Agreement came into play. This agreement is now 2 years old. What have you been doing since the signing of the Stockholm Agreement? This kind of static situation that you are in with the Houthis on the front lines, what is the exact condition of the front lines now? We had hoped that the Stockholm Agreement would actually achieve something for the Yemeni people. And this is the main purpose behind the Stockholm Agreement, to alleviate the suffering. But unfortunately, none of it was implemented. The only thing that was implemented is that it stopped the battle and stopped the liberation of Hodeidah from these militias who are using the Hodeidah port for smuggling and for their own interests, and also for military purposes, smuggling weapons and ballistic missiles through the port. The Houthis continued in their control of the port. They never handed over the port or its control, and they did not withdraw their forces from within Hodeidah city, as was the agreement, as per the Stockholm Agreement. As forces within the joint forces, we adhered to the Stockholm Agreement. It was signed by the legitimate government, and we have committed to anything signed by the government because they represent the constitutional legitimacy of the Yemeni state and represents all Yemenis. The coalition was also a party to this. The Arab coalition was also a party to this agreement. We tried to work on other issues, but unfortunately, any movement in its front lines has been stopped, and any violation by our side will not be accepted by the international community or even by the Arab coalition or the legitimate government. We invested this time to develop our forces, to restructure them. We started working on development and also humanitarian assistance. We established a number of water projects, like a large-scale water project in Hais, which was destroyed by the Houthis. They blew up the wells in Direhmi. We dug new wells. We used solar power for these and provided water through pipelines of longer than 14 kilometers in this project. There are also water projects in Direhmi and Hodeidah and other parts of the governorate. We renovated some of the schools there. We repaired some of the roads and public buildings. We also established centers for fishermen on the coast. We've also worked on some of the humanitarian assistance, helping IDPs, supporting healthcare services and service provision in general. We also provide a lot of assistance to the local authorities on the West Coast. We support the security forces. We support the local residents. With regards to the battle itself, violations continue on a regular basis. The Houthis have exploited this. They've entrenched themselves further in their positions, and things have gotten more complicated. The Houthis have not adhered to their part in the Stockholm Agreement, but with regards to the front lines themselves or any changes or shifts, there have not been any changes. Last November, we participated in the defense of Marib. We got a formal request, and we had a meeting within the Arab coalition with the other military forces, and they said that the legitimate government was discussing this, but they said we volunteered to participate, but the legitimate government said that they did not need external forces to participate in the defense of Marib. And we wish them well, and we hope that they are victorious in that battle. I was just going to ask about this. There had been talk that there would be forces deployed from the West Coast to Marib, but until now there has not been any acceptance or rejection of this offer. Is that the case? Yes, we offered our support after the first assault or the first wave, where the Houthis took control of the Mas base and made progress in Sarwah and also in the desert front lines towards Al Alam base. And then their assault stopped for, I think, 2 or 2.5 months. And then the second wave started. During this period, we said we had the forces, and the front lines here are not dynamic, or there are no changes. And we could support the National Army and support this battle, which we believe is a part of the battle of all Yemenis against the Houthi coup. We offered to deploy some of our forces there to Marib, where we could help and assist in some of the activities, but we did not get a positive response. Why don't you move to another front line other than Hodeidah if the situation is so static? At the end of the day, I'm not the person who makes this decision whether we can move to other front lines. The legitimate government who make these decisions regarding military strategy. Okay, thank you. Let's go back to the West Coast specifically to your relationship with the UN delegation based on the Stockholm Agreement, which was supposed to monitor the agreement. There was some tension in this relationship, and I think you have a negative assessment of this delegation. Why do you think this UN delegation is a problem for you? What is your assessment of its activities? We don't blame the UN delegation themselves, but we think their performance recently has not been as required. It does not represent the performance of the United Nations. Under General Kamart, and I think their performance was better and it was more neutral. But recently, after the ship that they were operating out of, the ship left and they went into offices under the control or in the Houthi-controlled areas. They're under more pressure. They cannot go anywhere without approval from the Houthis. There cannot be meetings where the Houthis hinder their meetings. And even some of the members of this delegation, the Houthis use their authority as those controlling Sana'a and granting visas and entry. Anyone who they don't want to come in, they don't allow them to go in through Sana'a airport. So our suggestion was that the headquarters of this UN delegation be in a neutral area, like Hodeidah Airport. This is an area which is on the front lines. We can both sides can secure this area where their offices or headquarters will be. It's a large area that can be protected, and they can then have contact with both sides if they are based there, whether with the Houthis or ourselves. And they can also use the airport itself for their own operations or for the humanitarian operations of the United Nations in general. Things got more complicated when Colonel Saleh was martyred at one of the observation points. The United Nations, unfortunately, did not investigate it, despite the fact that we called for it. He was killed by a Houthi sniper, and it was not an accident. He was taken to Aden for treatment, and we said that this man was one of the members of the UN committees. They're the ones who imposed or called for these observation points, and they asked for joint teams to be made up. And they said that we should start with joint observers from both sides. And we started it, and this military officer was one of the best that we had working on this. And the Houthis targeted him because they saw him as a problem. They targeted and killed him. When we took him to Aden for treatment, his situation was very dire. He was unable to travel for treatment outside. The United Nations did not cooperate in helping provide this treatment for him. This complicated our relationship with the UN. We withdrew all of our officers from these observation points because we did not want to put them at risk, especially if the UN would not do anything about it. Okay, let me ask you about your relationship with the local authorities in the Taiz governorate, which Mocha is a part of, the Mocha port is a part of. How is this relationship? Is it a complicated relationship? Is the political identity of the group in power in Taiz, of the party in power in Taiz, is it reflected in your relationship with the local authorities, or do you have a good relationship with the local authorities in Mocha? There are some who are trying to cause a media ruckus about this relationship, and this does not serve our interests as Yemenis. Our relationship with the governor is good. He's the one who makes appointments. He's the one who appoints district managers, and that's not our job to do that. We cooperate with them and we try to facilitate anything we can. But with regards to who is in control on the ground, we said that anytime the governor wants to come visit these areas, who wants to come to observe what is happening in Mocha, we don't have a problem. We don't have any problems with the local authorities. The deputy governor has visited Mocha a number of times. We don't have any issue with this. But for us to come under the control of any other political party, I think that's not in anyone's interest. We're now in the middle of a battle for the liberation of these areas. We're in an extraordinary situation, but we do not deny we've never claimed to not recognize the local authorities. They are the authorities on the ground, and we do everything we can to assist them in that function. Just to clarify for the journalists who are, any journalists who are here, anyone who has any questions, you could use the raise hand function on Zoom, or you could write your questions in the chat and we will ask them. Tareq, what about Mocha Port? Why is Mocha Port still closed? What is the situation in the port itself? Mocha Port has been closed since 2014, I believe, and now we're prepared to open it. We don't have any problem with it being open. We reached an agreement with the local authorities and the Prime Minister's office to appoint a manager, and someone was actually appointed. Dr. Abdul Malik was appointed by the governor, and this appointment is going to be approved was approved by the Prime Minister's office. He is there, but unfortunately, he does not have any resources to assist in the management of the port. We obviously want Mocha Port to be developed and to be a way into Yemen for assistance, for supplies, for goods. If anything happens to Hodeidah, Mocha Port can be ready to take over. In the past, the port was under the control of military leadership, but that is not the case now. If the government wants to come in and restart operations, they can do that by providing resources to the port authority. But if you want to operationalize the port without any resources, I think there needs to be rehabilitation efforts and renovation. It was bombed by the Houthis. It was also bombed by the coalition when the Houthis were in control. And there needs to be a lot of repair work to restart operations. But for us, we don't have any problem with the port reopening. Let us leave the West Coast for a bit, and I have a question that's a bit sensitive. Why have the Houthis not released your brother and your son? Why did they release some of your cousins instead, who were detained by them? There were mediation efforts by the Omanis and the late Sultan Qaboos. Tried to mediate with the Houthis. There was a request by my family to do so, and he communicated with them through the channels that the Omanis have with the Houthis. The Houthis continued with the discussion for a while, and there were also some problems with. There was also some mediation efforts by prominent social figures and members of the General People's Congress, like the head of the GPC, Sheikh Sadiq Amin Abu Ras, as well as many others, including Sheikh Yahya Ra'i and other prominent social figures and politicians. After a lot of discussions in between the two, there was a televised meeting that Abdul Malik al-Houthi had, and a lot of tribal figures and sheikhs were in attendance, and Abdul Malik al-Houthi told them in this televised meeting, he said, I will release two, and you have to convince, and then two more will be released in a second stage. He said that he was under pressure by, this is what he said that he was under pressure by extremist factions within his own group, but he said that that by my own name, that in 2 months we will release the remaining Muhammad and Affash, my son and brother. And this was the agreement that was reached. They said they didn't think that he would be able to lie in a televised meeting or a statement that was this public, especially since he sees himself as a man with a holy lineage. After a while, even the visits to these detainees were stopped and communication was stopped, but hopefully they will be released soon. When was the last time you contacted them? Myself personally, in December 2017 was the last time I contacted them. But there was contact with them through my brothers and through my mother, who would be in touch with them. The last call was in February 2 years ago, almost exactly 2 years ago, February 2019. So as long as we're talking about the Houthis and Tareq, there is always a question that we hear is how Tareq, how you were able to escape the Houthis after the events that occurred in December 2017. God made it easy. I went through it was a number. I was able to leave after they took control of the city, and their tanks were meters away from the positions that we were in control of. We were able to leave along with a small group of people. We went our separate ways, and then I went from one home to another. And after a few days, I would hear about raids, and so I would have to leave. I stayed 10 days. I spent 10 days in Sana'a after trying to leave the city. And 4 different homes. There was an offer that I would leave. There was an offer to leave to Marib, but I preferred to leave to Aden, and I organized this through people who worked in smuggling, and I was able to leave Sana'a. We used different vehicles, including a truck and a taxi, and I was able to arrive in Aden, thankfully, safe and sound. And the most important part, I think most of it was in a cargo truck, actually, most of my trip. We'll need to hear more details about this, about how you were able to leave Sana'a later on. But now, just we'll see if we can take questions from some of the attendees here. We'll come back to my questions later. There's a question from the national in the UAE. What do you think about the Biden administration stance towards Saudi Arabia and their pressure on the kingdom? And also, what are the opportunities that you see for talks with the Houthis? Potential opportunities. If you mean with regards to the pressure on the war in Yemen or peace, or just the pressure by the Biden administration, one of which is on the Yemen issue. I think it's a new administration that comes in with hopes that this pressure might lead to peace, might try to take that path. But when they start dealing with the Houthis, when they start seeing how the Houthis behave and how they respond to political dialogue, I think they'll change. But with regards to the pressure of the Biden administration, this war has gone on for 60 years. The legitimate government has been unable to achieve any sort of victory to liberate Sana'a. And this obviously makes the international community ask questions of why the war is taking so long. I think this pressure by the Biden administration is a bit exaggerated because it didn't actually provide any solutions. It did not try to have tangible points. And it did not also exert pressure on the other side, which is Iran, to start ensuring that there is progress on the issue of Yemen. So the Biden administration should also pressure Iran as well, not just one side of the parties to the conflict. There's another question from Beth from The Guardian. She was asking about what is the current state of your relationship with the UAE? It is a partnership. We and the UAE have put in place principles for this coalition, for this coalition or this alliance. That this is our cause, this is our interest. You are a part of this coalition, and we need support to fight against the Houthis. And we welcome this support from them. That we are on the condition that we are partners to liberate Yemen, partners to restore the state. These are our main objectives: to restore the state and state institutions, ensure the return of state institutions, and ensure the return of the legitimate government. This is the agreement that we had for our partnership with the UAE, and the UAE has adhered to this on its side, and on our side, we have also adhered to it. There are no other interests or agendas outside of the liberation of Yemen from this coup. Let's go back to your talk about the role that Iran plays what role exactly is Iran playing? What is it doing? We know that they are part of this axis with the Houthis, but what exactly is Iran doing? What information do you have in the joint forces with regards to Iran's role? Iran has created the war. Iran started the war. Iran made the Houthis start this animosity with neighboring countries. Iran made the Houthis move towards Aden. Iran made the Houthis kill Ali Abdul Saleh. Iran is providing them with arms. It is defending them. It is financing them. Even their ideologies from Iran. Their seminars. Qasem Soleimani's pictures were put up in Sana'a by the Houthis. This is the relationship with Iran. He's not a Yemeni. Why would a picture of Qasem Soleimani be put up on a billboard in Sana'a if not for Iranian influence? And they're also Iranian experts. They are in Sana'a. And now it's very clear. They have an ambassador in Sana'a. They're no longer doing it in a hidden way. And this ambassador has a background in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and is not a diplomat. There's a question from the deputy Dutch ambassador. He's asking about the political bureau. Are the giant brigades and the Tahama resistance, are they part of the giant brigades? They bless it, but you know that they are very religiously conservative and do not get involved in political affairs. But they said we support that the voice of the political bureau gets across, and they consider to represent them. But with regards to the Tahami resistance, most of the resistance commanders are members of the political bureau, and they were in attendance at all meetings. What is the relationship on the West Coast between your forces and the giants and the Tahami resistance? Who chooses the military strategy? After the withdrawal, or even before the withdrawal of the Emirati forces, they formed the joint command and the joint operations room between the National Resistance and the Giants Brigades. The Tahami Resistance are a part of the National Resistance and part of the Giants Brigades. So the UAE formed the Joint Operations Command, and there are representatives from the Giants Brigades, from the National Resistance, and from the Tahami Resistance. And the decisions are made all through consensus and consultations through meetings between the leadership and representatives of all of these parties, and they make what they believe is the best decision with regards to military strategy. This area specifically, the West Coast, was always a hotbed of smuggling in Yemen. Played a very big role in smuggling networks. How are smuggling activities now? Smuggling is ongoing. I'm not going to say that we'll ever be able to 100% complete it. I think even superpowers cannot control their borders. The United States can't control its border with Mexico. And we have this very long coastline, and it's very difficult to control. We've been able to control some of the smuggling activities, especially with regards to weapons smuggling, those linked to Iran, and other smuggling groups the capture of other smuggling groups will be announced, including those smuggling explosives to the Houthis through Salif port, and we will announce these operations soon. Our capacity, we established Coast Guard units for this purpose, and we're the ones who support these Coast Guard units, and we linked them to the Coast Guard authority in the government. And these Coast Guards carry out patrols out in the sea, but their capacity is limited. Hopefully, over time, we'll be able to develop this capacity so that they can deal with smuggling activities more efficiently. They also secure some of the islands, like the two Hanish Islands and Zufar, and there are forces there to secure these islands as well. These are Coast Guard units that are there. Are there any other questions? You could raise your hand. You could use the raise hand function on Zoom, or you could also write in the chat. There's a question from Matthias. He said, are Tareq Saleh's forces, are there resistance forces in a Turba, and what would their interests be there? No, there are no resistance forces in a Turba. They're just families of the fighters who are there. Going back to the Red Sea, I think this is a very interesting topic, and people are always asking questions about it. How do you deal with the rest of the world's concerns in the Red Sea? Not necessarily challenges, but and how do other countries deal with you as the force that is in control of the West Coast? How exactly is your relationship with other states involved in the Red Sea? The Red Sea, as you know, is very important in the region, and it also links two very important straits, which is the Suez Canal and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait. And it is very important for international shipping and commerce. There's a lot of threats, whether by the Houthis, the Houthi attempts, obviously as a part of the Iranian strategy. Iran controls the Hormuz Strait, and it is a threat to shipping through there. If Iran is also able to pose a threat through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait through its agents in Yemen, who are the Houthis, it will be able to pressure the international economy, especially the countries of the Gulf. After liberating these areas after the joint forces supported by Emirati forces were able to liberate these areas, we're trying to maintain this control and this accomplishment and to ensure that the shipping lanes remain safe. But coalition ships also play a very important role on the Red Sea in securing international shipping lanes. We try to ensure that there will not be any attacks from the areas that are under our control, that there will not be any attacks on shipping lanes from there. But we fear that there will be, our concern is that there will be terrorist groups that might try to take advantage of the absence of the state to cause problems and off of the west coast of Yemen. Now the Houthis are also working on developing their naval capacity using explosive boats, drones. We're trying to deal with this and trying to confront this threat, but we still need more capacity and support in order to do this. Before we move on to another question by Lauren Clark, how do you see Qatari and Turkish influence in the Red Sea? How do you deal with this influence, Turkish Qatari influence in the Red Sea? Yemen does not need any more foreign interventions. We already have the Arab coalition there. This is the entity that is trying to support the situation. Anyone that wants to help Yemenis or to champion the Yemeni cause, they can come through this coalition and they're welcome to do so. But for other countries to come in outside of that framework, I don't think Yemen can bear any more foreign intervention in its affairs. Lauren Clark, go ahead.
Hi, how are you? I'm Lauren Clark, guest contributor for Thrive Global. I have a question as it relates to the monitoring of Yemeni women, specifically in their involvement in trying to navigate peace process and trying to create a peace agreement with the Houthis. What activities, on the ground activities, are happening with Yemeni women regarding strategizing, organizing, whatever it has to be, navigating for resources, organizing within the community, working with the government? What organizations, what activities, whatever have been established by Yemeni women to try to hurry up the peace process or trying to create some type of equilibrium with the Houthis? Thank you.
I think that the role of women is very important in the peace process, and women need to be included in any political activities. The Office of the UN Special Envoy is supportive of this track, and they have a group of Yemeni female activists who are working on this. We support, obviously, the participation of women in the political arena and also in community work. And here on the West Coast and Hodeidah, we have Fatian Omari, who is the head of social affairs in the government, and she provides very important services to the community there. We support any women's activities in the areas that we are. There is a question from Maria Louise. If there is an agreement like the Stockholm Agreement in Marib, what do you think needs to be done to try to learn from the mistakes made by the Stockholm Agreement? There needs to be independence in the decision making within the committee, the monitoring committee. They should not be under the control of the Houthis specifically. I think with the legitimacy or the coalition, they're more flexible. At the end of the day, they're states. They're dealing with the United Nations as diplomats and as politicians. But if you deal with a gang like the Houthis, it's much more difficult. It's just an armed group. They're much more chaotic. They don't have a clear decision making mechanism. There needs to be independence of decision making within the committees that are responsible. There also needs to be inclusiveness and monitoring and observation of the ceasefire. And there also needs to be accountability for any violations. There need to be forces or entities to deal with this. But if we just have this kind of ceasefire that is implemented that is very vague and does not have any actual implementation on the ground, it won't be useful. With regards to the Stockholm Agreement, if it weren't for the discipline of the national resistance forces and the coalition, then the situation would be much worse. What do you think is the ideal solution for the conflict in Yemen? How will that look? I think the situation is very complicated on the ground, and it will need time, and it will need also confidence and credibility among the parties, and it will also need clarity. The first thing we would need is to have good intentions by all of the parties. This will happen through a comprehensive ceasefire on all of the front lines with international monitoring of the ceasefire. All of the detainees need to be released as well. These are the first two steps. As confidence, there will be excellent confidence building measures between the parties. After that, I think it's important for Yemenis to reach a solution, a political and security solution. We have to work on these in parallel. I cannot go back to Sana'a as long as it is under the control of the Houthis. Sana'a needs to be secured and needs to be welcoming for all Yemenis. It needs to be governed by a military committee or an independent force. Politicians will return to Sana'a. Presidential council will be appointed, and a technocratic government will be appointed from this presidential council, and they will be a caretaker government during the transitional period. The shorter the transitional period, a year or 2 years, and the shorter it is, it'll be the better. We shouldn't go into these long, drawn-out dialogues that will extend the transitional period. And after that, there will be local elections and presidential elections and parliamentary elections. I think this is the foundation for any solution. It is obviously very difficult because if the intentions are true and there is credibility and the parties really want peace, then I think we can do it. The first step to do this would be for the Houthis to give up the idea that they have a God-given right to rule, that they have. I think this would need to be the first step. Without this step, then everything else is worthless. If they still believe that they have a God-given right to rule, if they believe that they don't have to adhere to the principles of a constitution and democracy, what's the point? Look at Libya, for example. They had a very bloody conflict. They would try to go into Tripoli or Benghazi. But then when there was pressure from the international community, they sat down together and agreed on elections, and things started to gradually improve there. But how can we have elections when we have a group that believes that God has appointed them as the rulers of the country? Why would they have elections? They want to have the elections at a lower level than the level that they are at. I'll go back to the South. Very quickly, how is your relationship with the Southern Transitional Council? The STC, our relationship, we have a common goal, which is regaining control of Sana'a. We've talked about this with them, that this is our main objective, and we also thank them because at the beginning of the process, they supported us. They were a big part of establishing the presidential, and despite the fact that there was incitement. They told them that I had come to invade Aden. I came with 10 other people. How could I invade Aden? But they were trying to cause problems amongst us. But the STC supported us and stood with us, and we will never forget their position at the time. Tell me about the humanitarian situation on the West Coast. There are front lines that are very active. There are many people who are being displaced from their homes. How do organizations operate? Also, what is your relationship with relief organizations? what exactly is happening with regards to the humanitarian situation. The humanitarian situation on the west in Yemen as a whole is difficult, and I think the west coast is one of the poorest areas in Yemen. We have worked with our partners, whether it is the Emirati Red Crescent or the Saudi Fund, to ensure that this assistance and relief supplies got to the communities. But we want these organizations to increase their operations in Yemen. We will help them do anything they need to do, anything that is difficult. We will try to help them overcome it. We will provide them with the security that they need, or anything else that they need us to do. But we want them to increase their operations in Yemen and to also focus on the West Coast, just like they're focusing on other parts of Yemen. There's a question that we have here. Could you summarize your relationship with the Houthis before the killing of Ali Abdullah Saleh? The relationship with the Houthis, okay. This was a very difficult stage or period for us with the beginning of Operation Resolute Storm. Ever since the Houthis entered Sana'a, really, the situation was very difficult to deal with, and it increased with the beginning of military operations. President Ali Abdullah Saleh, may Allah have mercy on us all, he called for the war to stop, and he called for people to come to dialogue. And now, after 6 years of war, everyone else is starting to understand what he was calling for. He said that war will never get us the results that we want. But unfortunately, war was much louder than those calling for peace, and we were not involved in it at the time. There was much more targeting the homes of the GPC. The leadership of the GPC were being targeted, and we could not find any way out, whether through the legitimacy or the coalition, for the GPC's voice to be heard. They demonized the GPC that remained in Yemen. They believe that if we end Ali Abdullah Saleh, we will end the Houthis. And this was a grave strategic mistake committed by the military operations. Ali Abdullah Saleh's homes were targeted, and they tried to kill him with airstrikes. But thankfully, he survived these airstrikes. We saw that state institutions might get lost. We wanted to try to curb the influence and power of the Houthis, and this was only an alliance out of necessity to try to maintain state institutions and try to be the rational side of that alliance and bring the Houthis to peace. And I think people in Sana'a have noticed a difference after the martyrdom of President Ali Abdullah Saleh, how state institutions are now completely under the control of the Houthis. People are being subject to their ideology. Any government employee must pledge their loyalty to the Houthis. In the past, this wasn't the case. There were state institutions to a certain extent, and this is the problem. This is the main issue with our alliance at the time with the Houthis. And this was the last step that we had, whereas the rest of the political parties went to the Houthis in Saada. And they went to Abdul Malik al-Houthis' home in Saada with the UN Special Envoy at the time, Jamal bin Umar. They went to had meetings with Abdul Malik al-Houthi, and they also facilitated the Houthi entry into Sana'a. And only the GPC and the Nasrists were against the Peace and National Partnership Agreement that the Houthis then used to take control of state institutions and to take other governorates in Yemen. I have two more questions. One is, how do you see the role of Salafis within the forces that are on the West Coast? I don't think anyone can deny the role that Salafis have played in the battles, the important military role. But most of the ones that I've interacted with, they tell me that they want the state to be restored so that they can return to their schools and their masjids. This is all that they want. This is all that they talk about. Tareq Saleh, have you been targeted? Have there been any assassination attempts? Any attempts on your life? Other than the Houthis, no. Just the Houthis. But the Houthis, yes, there have been a number of attempts using missiles, drones, etc. But nothing other than these kinds of operations. No, no, they can't do anything on the ground, so they have to resort to the use of missiles or drones. But it's very difficult for them to get here in person. The last question that we just got was on Tez. What can be expected with regards to the ongoing battles there? What developments can we expect? What could happen? And can government forces maintain the advances that they have made? I think what the battles in Tez need is more efforts, more unified efforts. They need more further support. These forces need to be unified. The military command needs to be unified in all of these battles. But I think the men that are on the ground that are fighting are excellent people, but they just need to be, these forces need to be structured in the correct way. Brigadier General Tareq Saleh, the head of the Political Bureau of the National Resistance Forces, I thank you for your time, for this opportunity. I think it was an excellent discussion. We're very happy to have you, and hopefully we can meet you again. Thank you very much, Majid. I thank all the attendees, and hopefully the Political Bureau can represent different segments of Yemeni society. And it was created, I met with a number of prominent social figures who demanded that we start working in the political arena. They said that we did not, their options were very limited with the current political parties, and they wanted parties that did not have a religious background. They wanted something that was more focused on the Republic of Yemen, that would serve the national interest, a political entity that they could join. And they told me that that was the only force that had the presence on the ground that would allow them to express their political opinions and have a voice in the political arena. Thank you very much, Tareq. Thank you all who attended.